Good morning, everyone. Be very welcome. Happy New Year to all of you. Happy New Year, Anna. Dear Anna, today is our first meeting of the year, English meeting, and I really wish you all a very, very happy year. Very happy New Year. We're going to start our meeting today with a very short reading from the book Happy Life, psychographed by Divaldo Franco and dictated by the spirit Joanna de Angelis. And put it over here. Oops. It's a very short, it's message number 10. And what Joanna de Angelis brings to us is organize your schedule so that you can spend your time appropriately. Every task must be seen to at the right time. Disorganization and carrying it out not only harms its order, but compromises its quality. Perform your duties calmly and uninterruptedly, one after the other. That's the very short uh, message that we have for this meeting. And I'm going to invite you all to pray a very short prayer, closing your eyes if you wish, asking the presence of the benevolent spirits that are here to embrace us with their hearts, and asking the Master Jesus to be with us. Dear Lord, you know how much fragility we still hold in our spirits, but we all know that the capability that we have are immense because we have you walking through the darks of shadows, the darks of obstacles, the valley of many obstacles that we face during the course of our existence. And you're going to give us the strength that we need with the teachings that still echoes inside of our ears more than 2,000 years ago. Bring us peace, not the peace that simply will be coming from a simple word, a short meditation, but the peace that are being built during the course of the years with the full knowledge that a serene human being, someone that is really connected to the divine, will experience the peace that you always brought to us. Embrace us immensely, and bring us this peace that the world cannot give us, but only you can give it to us. On this note, we ask the permission to open our meeting today, giving once again a happy new year to all the ones, to everyone in the true realms of life that came to the center. Thank you very much, and so be it. Well, today we have dear Andreia. She's going to share with us a topic about perseverance. And I invite you, Andreia, to please share with us the result of the reflections and the result of your studies with us. Please be very welcome.
Well, good morning once again. Happy New Year. First Sunday meeting of the year since we went on a little bit of a break. So it's really great to be here. And of course, as we always begin a new year, we usually try to get a reflection based on the new year, right? And the message that we found was on the book A Full Life, which is one of the latest books by the medium Divaldo Pereira Franco and the spirit author Joana de Angelis. And the message is entitled Insist and Persevere. That's the message that we had found. And I really truly welcome you to find this book because it's a book of 30 messages only. And the introduction itself talks about the ability of the author to bring us content that is not only aligned with the Spiritist thinking, but is also aligned with a transpersonal psychology, which is characteristic of Joana de Angelis. And of course, the message, if you get to it, you're going to notice every message in reality has three moments. The first one is a general introduction about the topic. The middle one brings a little bit closer to us in the way in which we can apply uh, the teaching in itself. And then the final one is aligned with Christ's proposal of the topic in itself. So it's a very special book. And if you get the book, you're also going to notice that the message is targeting Spiritist workers, which we have here in our center. Anna, who's responsible for being able to get us to occupy the space. So I don't know if she knows, but she's directly a Spiritist worker. And what is your name? Sorry, in the back again? Jad, who's just started last year with us, right? A few years. Okay. So good to have you. Good morning, everyone. But in reality, it also talks about the Spiritist worker who embraces the message of immortality, is aware of its responsibilities towards acquiring inner enlightenment, and works effortlessly to get to that, insisting and persevering. So it's a very beautiful message that we decided to bring here. Some of you might be new to Spiritism, and I'm talking also about the people that are watching us online right now. Welcome if you're watching us online. And you may have already heard about Allan Kardec and his immeasurable work of codifying Spiritism and bringing it to us. Some may have already read all 5 books of the Spirit codification. And hopefully you're continuing studying because it's not a light reading, and it is something that should be studied often. Because as we grow and evolve in knowledge, the perception of what the content brings might be different today than it was a few years ago. And we notice that every time we get a question from the Spirit's book. But a lot of people may not have known how Allan Kardec came to be the educator that he is. And we have to mention Pestalozzi, who not only studied, Allan Kardec studied with him in Yverdon in Switzerland, but then became his disciple. And the process of educating, collaborating in the promotion of the education system that had a great influence in France. And one of the things that Pestalozzi stated is that we can basically rate the success of an education when we take into factor 3 very important elements. And he's going to say that the elements are fundamental elements and factors: work, solidarity, and perseverance. That's what he says. And so he states that it is because of perseverance aligned with courage that it's going to allow the person to reach the fulfillment of their souls. And of course, we're not talking about the fulfillment of material things that we aspire for, that we long for, which is natural because we are in a material world and we need them. But he's talking about the fulfillments of the soul, virtues that need to be acquired when we go through an educational system, right? Through an educational process. But then Joana de Angelis, she's going to remind us that when we consider the 3 factors, work, solidarity, and perseverance, She's going to say that if we look in history and we pay attention to the great heroes that marked our very history in the world, we're going to find some very great examples. She mentions first and foremost Abraham Lincoln. She got me as a fan even more when she starts with Abraham Lincoln. And she says it was because of his perseverance that even though he was not elected a few times before he won the presidential election, that he actually persevered, insisted, and became the president of this country. And there was a mission behind it that does not come easy. If we consider the people that may be running a country, especially back then, we're talking about how he was responsible for the Emancipation Proclamation. If we studied in the United States or even in Brazil a little bit of history, we're going to find how he actually lived through very terrible situations, freeing the slave, the American Civil War, and other aspects. And then she goes on to say about those who also served with courage and love and perseverance, such as Martin Luther King, who had a dream. And we already know what his dream was, which was a world where discrimination no longer took place in it. And of course, we know how that ended for him, but he was also aware of his responsibility and that he needed to persist with courage, with work, and most of all, with solidarity and fraternity. And then she mentions Pasteur. Am I pronouncing that right? Pasteur. I'm more English than French. Pasteur, who, sick with tuberculosis, insisted and persevered, even though he was showered with sarcasm. He continued to search for the airborne microorganisms, opening new horizons for the medical science. And then she ends this little bit of travel into the past, mentioning Jesus and his disciples. And this in itself gives us more than 35 minutes to talk about, because if there was ever an example of perseverance, of insisting on an idea, it was that of the disciples in trying to follow Jesus' step to be able to disseminate the good news. We talk a lot about propagating Spiritism, right? And we do that with all respect towards all of the philosophies and religions that guide men and women towards the good. Spiritism is not the only body of knowledge in the world that does that. In a world with 8 billion people, right? I mean, if we take into consideration the different cultures, the different countries, the different aspects of educational process, it would be impossible for one religion only to lead man into the good. But since we're talking about Spiritism here, I remember that a person said, it's very difficult for us with Spiritism to believe that we are going to be like the disciples in propagating Spiritism. And there seems to be this concern that everybody becomes a Spiritist. And I remember that this was a really good study group in which we reminded everyone that there isn't a worry about propagating Spiritism in a sense where we demand that everybody, or what's the word, that we indoctrinate, right? Everybody to become Spiritists. But there is indeed an urgency to promote a message of immortality, so that people know that the here and now is temporary, and that it is actually something that is going to be positive for our immortal spirit to try to put into actions, persevering into the good, which is often very hard in the world that we live in, especially when we consider everything that is going around. A lot of people might say, well, why should I be doing all of this good stuff when I look beside me and my neighbor is not, and he is being successful, and I am suffering, right? So for this, the book Heaven and Hell tells us that we must look ahead. We must raise ourselves above matter, about materialistic ideas, to be able to envision the future. Make sure whomever is calling is participating in our study group. But it's New Year, right? It's the new year, and a lot of people talk about resolutions. Anybody did that this year? Yeah, I didn't either, to be honest.
I gave up.
You gave up, right?
Gave up.
But we're celebrating. It was midnight, and my brother-in-law, he's got a great humor, and he's like, okay, so it's midnight. What changed? What changed? From 2022 to 2023, at midnight, did something change? The year changed. But there is something about it that makes us feel hopeful. What's the name of the song, Anna? Na, na, na.
Old Lang Syne.
Old Lang Syne. Beautiful. Thank you. When that song comes on, I don't know about you, just thinking about it, I got goosebumps because there is something hopeful in the air that happens. It's as if we are literally getting a fresh start, a new book, blank pages in which we can draw on it, we can use our creativity. And a lot of people do make resolutions, and that's very wholesome. But studies have shown that only 20% of people are able to accomplish wholeheartedly from the beginning until the end. That's the truth of it. But it's not for us to feel hopeless or helpless. We're talking about even though we may fail, even though we might fall back, even though we might find ourselves struggling with what we decided to accomplish in the beginning of the year, whether it is losing weight, whether it is being more committed to our study, to the Spirit Center, to our family, to the relationship, whatever it might be, there might be setbacks because we are imperfect towards a road of perfection. It is very interesting that Joana de Angelis, in the cover of the book, A Full Life, I don't know if you guys know of this or not, but she's very involved in her books. Just a little fun fact. It is a tree. It is a tree. And it's a beautiful cover. The first book is called Empty Lives. It's also a book with 30 messages that she brought us in the midst of the pandemic in 2020. And then she comes in 2021 at the end of it, and she releases A Full Life. And it's a beautiful full tree, blossomed beautifully. And so when we start considering about that, we remember that that tree came from a seed. And that's us, basically a seed. Or we have all of the seeds waiting to germinate within us, but it takes time. Nature shows us that there is a process for everything. And as far as our inner growth is concerned, there's also a time for that. But the question 117 of the Spirit's book, Allan Kardec asked, does it depend on the spirits themselves to hasten their advancement toward perfection? And the answer, absolutely. The time it takes them depends on their desire and submission to God's will. Doesn't a well-behaved child learn faster than the one who's obstinate? It's interesting, right? Because we are children. We are working towards entering that teenage years, or maybe some of us are already there. And I know some here have teenage kids and you know how that is, right? Rebellion. I know more than my father. I know more than my parents. And sometimes that's us. I know more than God what is better for me. So sometimes I persist and I insist on ideas that is not going to get us anywhere. Is that bad? No, it's not. Because eventually we're going to come into the realization of what is good or not for us. We are going to be able to discern. And the only way we do that is when we make mistakes. It's true, right? Even when we are growing up, and I'm looking at the parents of teenagers. Anybody else have teenagers as kids? Well, his kids are already in college. Well, yours too. But then you still have one that is entering, right? So it's hard. And so it is for us as we continue to grow spiritually. None of us are already in adulthood, spiritually speaking. Otherwise, we'd already be in a world of regeneration. And the truth of the matter is that we're still transitioning. We're still getting there. It's kind of like when I arrived in the United States and I was 13 going to 14, and my father made me go to summer school. I mean, who does that, right? He made me go to summer school. Usually you do that when you're missing a credit or something. Now, my dad made me go to summer school because he felt that it would help me get acquainted with the country, get acquainted with the language. And I thank you, Dad, by the way. Now I know that it was best for me. But back then, I didn't like that. It was a transitioning phase of arriving from a Brazilian culture, country, language to the one in the United States. And it was quite hard, but I'm quite proud because it was through the effort. And I remember that one of the greatest factor that allowed me to try to learn English as fast as I could was speaking to my grandfather, who was Scottish and did not speak a word of Portuguese. So that was, I loved him so much. I love him so much that was the factor that allowed me to really persevere and insist on learning a language that was really hard. I mean, I missed the bus the first day. so that you guys know. And I didn't know how to say that. So my dad arrived in school like 7 p.m. and there I was sitting because I had no idea what to do. So it was awful, right? But that's something that stays with me forever. So Joana de Angeli is going to say, just as it was with all martyrs, idealists, the heroes, past and present, your triumph will not arrive today. So you're like, my God, I'm doing all of this. I'm not seeing any results. I'm persevering in the good and nothing's happening. I mean, I'm a fool. I'm doing all the right things. I'm not putting anybody, beneath me. I'm not stepping on anyone. I'm not stabbing anyone in the back. And yet I see no outcome. Why is it that bad things happen to good people? There's a book out there, Steve Post, I think. I don't remember who the author is. It's a really good book. So this is what she's saying. Sometimes all that we do may not show the results here and now. Let's look at it. Today we talk about Abraham Lincoln with such pride and gratitude for what he did. We look at Martin Luther King, and although discrimination is still a huge factor in our world, we see the impact that he had. When we look, sometimes I was watching, who was it that died? Forget. That dancer who died, Twitch, by suicide. Yes, right? And that was quite sad. And I'm like, why is it that we wait for people to die before we really show them how much we love and care and appreciate them? Shouldn't we be doing this now while they're alive? But basically, this is what she's saying. We are not going to see the results now. Insist and be willing to neutralize the darts of pessimism. This is really cool, right? The darts of pessimism, tiredness, discouragement, with smiles and understanding that no notable outcome comes without challenge. That's the truth. If we look at a seed, it needs to actually break through that soil. It's dark, it's moist, it's favorable condition for it to germinate. It receives the nutrients it needs. It receives the sun rays. Our sun is our master Jesus. And the rays that is thrown our way, that reaches our heart, has all of the nutrients, the knowledge, all of the teachings that we need to be able to blossom. And so she continues in saying, insist and persevere. As we look ahead, let us not be conflicted over past failures. This is really important. She goes on to say, now that we are preparing to build that which we believe to be of importance. And that's a very personal thing, right? Which is it that we have as something that is important. But a lot of times when we start a new year and then we fall back, we have a setback, we made a commitment to do something that was going to be wholesome, that was going to be filled with importance for our souls, we might have a setback. And she says, don't be conflicted over those failures. Look ahead, persist, insist on what is of importance. And this is especially true as we continue our work towards the perfection. And then she was complete saying, do not give in to self-punishment when something goes wrong during the implementation. Persevere because it is certainly not easy, but you will succeed if that is what you wish. This is a spirit who is like up here. She is the one who was alive and in contact and disseminating the good news at the time of Christ in the person of Joanna of Cusa. This is also in the book Prelude to the Divine Kingdom. And so she is someone who's coming and saying, I know that it's not easy because she has walked the trail that we are walking today. So she's not saying that out of, just to say, like sometimes we do that. A mother who lost a child and we've never had a child, like, oh, I know how you're feeling. No, we don't know. We've never gone through that. But they have gone through the things that we are going through. The difficulties, the challenges, of course, we're talking about the genre of difficulties, not the determined one for ourselves. Liberation from deep-rooted, pleasurable habits that squander our possibility is a challenge for sincere souls. So let's talk about this. Someone whose new resolution is to become somebody who is a little bit kinder, less weak. One of the teachings in the Beatitudes, Matthew 5. Thank you. Be meek. being docile, being kind. Like sometimes I was also talking to a very close friend of mine, and it's a characteristic sometimes that instead of acting, we react, and all of that harshness comes through, which we don't mean to, but it hurts someone, and we analyze that that needs to be changed. And so I'm talking personally. I'm opening up here because it's a very small group, so don't judge me.
Oh, it's small.
Yeah, it's not small group because it's the internet. Hi. But it's hard. She was talking to me, and it's as if I was looking in the mirror. She says, so I don't mean to, but before I know it, you know, and it becomes hard and rough, and it wasn't the mean to hurt anyone's feelings. So sometimes the resolution is just that. But she talks about deep rooted habits, things that we've been doing for centuries as immortal spirits, because this is not our first existence as a spirit here. We were created simple and unaware. The Spirit's book uses the word ignorant as in ignoring the divine laws or the sublime teachings because we are not able to understand that yet. So simple and unaware until we evolved through a primitive world, and then we got here to a world of trials and expiations. So the fact that we are transitioning to a world of regeneration tells us how far we've come. So yay for us, right? We should be proud. We've come very far. But there are still very deep-rooted habits that we bring, things that we keep repeating over and over. And people talk about wanting to know their past life existence. And a lot of mediums will say, just take a look at how you are today, and you're going to have an idea of who you were yesterday. We know what our deep-rooted habits are. We know it needs to be worked on. We know how hard it is as well, because we try and we fail. We try, we fail. But when we insist and persevere, that in itself is going to become a habit. It's going to become nature. It's going to become what we are. It's the effect of the firefly, they go on and off. So somebody asked, why is it that we are not able to be charitable all the time? Charity. I'm not talking about giving alms. I'm not talking about donating our used clothes. We're not talking about donating new clothes. We're talking about charitable, benevolent, indulgent, forgiving at all times. Why? Because we're still fireflies. Our light goes on and off, until eventually it's going to stay on. Habit is what is going to make it our nature. So she says, whenever you find yourselves overwhelmed by sadness, regret, inner upheaval over a failed attempt or over several failed attempts, that's when we should elevate our mental state, persist, and get back into the fight with no fear, with no tears, and no feeling of low worth about ourselves. Elevate our mental state. And how do we do that? How do we do that? We pray. Yeah, we pray. But sometimes we are so tired. We are so discouraged that it seems like we can't even pray. Anybody ever get like that? I mean, I have. It's hard. And I like to believe that in our silence, in which we can't really express anything, that Christ can hear our deepest feelings. And that in itself is the effort that we make in trying to elevate our mental state and connect with the benevolent spirits. Because she says that when we allow ourselves to feel like we've failed, like we are unworthy, that we are worthless, and maybe life is not even worth living, she says that there will be minds that will be attracted to our way of thinking. Discarnate spirits who will resonate, who will find affinity in the way in which our soul vibrates. And they're going to feed off of that. And worse yet, they might even strengthen that feeling, which is why a lot of people commit suicide. So we have to be very careful. She's going to say, the guardian angel that looks after you and humanity's destiny remain watchful and active. Watchful and active by your side. Invisible, but not ineffectual. They comfort us during hard times, encourage us to go on, and give us the strength in the name of a friend of the cross who resurrected so that we would be faithful to the end. There's a lot of people talk about Christ. There is a reason in the lesson of immortality when he resurrects. And we can learn about that also as we study about Spiritism. That comes to tell us that in reality, he's here ever watchful. And when they talk about being faithful to the end, it's having faith. We're filled with that faith that is rational. It is not a blind faith because we understand the reason for why we suffer. We understand the reason why we are yet to overcome certain things within ourselves. Yet we carry on. She says, you will succeed. You will succeed. You have the messages of the benevolent spirits to assist you in overcoming depressing ideas. A lot of people will say, Divaldo Franco comes to our March event every year. He's coming this year, or our annual event that attracts a lot of people from all over the country. And he never gave me a message. I shake his hand. I'm like, if he's a medium, he knows that I need a message. Why is it that he doesn't give me one? Well, let us go to the book shelves over there. We're going to find countless books. Because he actually told Joanna de Angelis, the spirit author, that he said, you comfort thousands of people with your messages, but you never gave me a message. So she's like, are you sure about that? Because every message begins with you, yourself. It's for you. If you know how to take advantage. They don't come just for, boredom. Benevolent spirits are never bored, which is something that happens to us. When we become engaged in a new activity, let's talk about this, right? Today I told Mary she's going to be promoted to the Spirit Center. She just started, participating in our center, even online virtually before we open. And we are very watchful of everybody can be a worker, but we are very watchful in seeing people's abilities and what they can do, and we try to fit them with things in the Spirit Center that will give them pleasure. So I really admire her honesty in saying what she wanted to do and what she did not want to do. But let's say that I gave her a task in the Spirit. It's not I, the house, the center gave her a task to do. She starts filled with enthusiasm. I remember when I started the work in the volunteering for book publishing, I was so enthusiastic. I was so encouraged. I felt like, oh my God, I'm going to fly. I look at posts back then on Facebook and I'm like, wow, where is that woman? She was so cheerful. She was so positive. She was so, optimistic. What happened? And Joanna de Angelis addresses that in saying that the day-to-day activity gets us to a point sometimes where we become tired. The tasks in which we took for ourselves become dull. We lose our optimism. We lose our courage. We lose the will, the desire to continue doing the work. Before I know it, I don't want to go to the Spirit Center anymore. Why? I'm just tired. I don't want to go. And she says that those are very subtle movements. She says, analyze yourself. If you find yourself now wanting to go to the center, now wanting to do the work that you were given so that you can evolve, analyze what is happening. Is it simply tiredness from the day-to-day activities, kids, work, home, cooking, cleaning, ironing? Who irons nowadays? I do. I like jeans ironed. Yeah, see? But then she says, that's natural. But if that's not the case, if you're just no longer filled with that initial joy of serving, whether it's in the Spirit Center or not, whether it's in a nursing home, whether it's in a hospital, any work of the good that we've acquired for ourselves because we believe that it's good to be of service. That's one of the lessons when Christ actually washed the disciples' feet, giving us this idea that we are all of service, that we all should practice humility, being humble. No one is above anyone. And Peter, when he sees Jesus coming to wash his feet, he's like, Master, no, I can't do that. I can't let you wash my feet. And Jesus says, well, then I want no part with you. And Peter realizes the lesson and he says, Master, wash my feet, my hands, and my entire body. Because he understood the message of humility and service. And so Joanna de Angelis says, be aware. Turn on the light of joy in the darkness of your mental space. And count on your spirit mentor who love you and are involved with your spiritual process. You have the right to make mistakes, but should strive not to. So don't be deliberate in making a mistake. Allow the mistake to happen because it's normal, but don't try for it. Don't look for it. This is what basically she's saying. Consider the fact, however, that your inner conflicts create a vibrational field that allows your mind to be hounded by other minds that detest you. Don't allow them to succeed in dominating you, in creating the impression that your will is the cause of the events of losing interest. So Enrique said, I'm not going to the center on Tuesday, so I decided to come on Sunday. He knows that we are shorter workers, and he decided to come. He probably is tired because he had a week feeling very sick. That's the truth. And so did his wife, who had to go to the emergency care. But he came. Now, imagine this. She says, don't allow the minds who wish to weaken your desire for work in the good to succeed in dominating you, creating the impression that your own will is the cause of these events, while inducing you to reject the help of both incarnate or discarnate friends, because the ego in these moments becomes delusional. So it's interesting because all of what she's saying is the one quality that we should be vigilant, that we should be conscious, that we should be aware of what is happening on and all around us, so that we can be a proactive participant in our own progress, because the benevolent spirits are counting on us. Insist and persevere. The feelings that we just talked about, they manifest themselves in a very subtle and persistent way, diminishing that enthusiasm that we shouldn't allow to get lost. Analyze the situation. And then she goes on with the message to talk even more about this aspect of not letting ourselves be defeated, leading us in a loss of interest of that which means so much or meant so much to us when we started. I was so angry when I started doing this study because I thought I was choosing this message because it was going to be beautiful for the new year and everything was for me. God, you're tough. But it is for us if we know how to take advantage of this. So renew your enthusiasm by reformulating the practice. And then we went on to question 783 of the Spirit's book, in which Allan Kardec brings us a comment that summarizes the question and the answer. And he says this: humans cannot remain forever in ignorance, since they must reach the goal set by providence. They are enlightened by the force of circumstances. Moral revolution, like social revolution, creep into people's ideas little by little. They germinate for centuries and suddenly burst forth, overthrowing the crumbling edifice of the past, which is no longer in accord with the new needs and new aspirations. So here we are. And when we analyze our lives and we look at it, we are exactly at that moment where these new germinations are certainly bursting forth, calling upon us basically to realize that what used to make sense and give us pleasure in the past, whether in this life or another, if it was directly involved with the immediate pleasures of our souls that are aligned with materialism, they no longer speak to our soul. We know too much. We can't say I didn't know any better. We can't. We have been in contact with the material and spiritism for a reason, as if we were guided, walking darkness, and we look up ahead and we see that lighthouse, a safe place to go, to find harbor, to find a place to accommodate ourselves in. And so they continue. In such upheavals, people usually do not perceive more than the momentary disorder, the confusion that affect their own material interests. Nevertheless, those who raise their thought beyond themselves admire the designs of providence. Such people are filled with such faith that it's unbelievable. I've been watching a documentary online, and this lady yesterday talked about her faith and her ability to see the assassination of both her son and daughter-in-law as something that was aligned with divine providence. Who does that? Who says that? And then I started analyzing her faith and her words. She meant it. Like you could see that she meant it, understanding. She says, I forgive whomever did this because they still haven't caught the person. She says, I forgive them because they don't know what I know. Look at that. They don't know what I know. A true Christian woman talking about her And though they continue. Upheavals are like the storms and disturbances that leave the atmosphere cleansed after having disrupted. So all of a sudden, something comes to our lives that says, something's got to change here. It's not good. We talk about free will. Yeah, we have free will. But something happens sometimes that is going to make us halt and consider our lives a little bit more. And so regarding the spiritual forces, we've already talked about these idle spirits who delight in afflicting us pain. But Allan Kardec, in the question 910, asked, can humans find in spirits an effective aid to help them overcome their passions? And they say, if you sincerely pray to God and your guardian angel, good spirits will certainly come to your aid. That's their mission. And we've been assigned to one even before we were born, incarnated. They could be sitting beside you right now. They could be giving you a healing pass right now. They could be clearing your mind, so hopefully anything that I might say might click in, hopefully, because it's the spiritist content. They might be waiting for us to open a little bit, a crack, so that the light can shine in and we can see clearly again, breathe a little bit easier. And it's amazing, the power of prayer indeed. The other thing that she talks about is making sure that we don't fall into the suggestions to leave our spiritual obligations for later on. You know what? I'm the way that I am. Eventually things are going to change. I have a future life anyway. So she says the possibility, the opportunity may not be found again for you until very later on, and a lot of suffering will come into that. So take advantage of the spiritual possibilities and opportunities before you. And so we remember the chapter 17, which is Be Perfect, which is one of my favorite chapters on the gospel according to Spiritism. And there is a few items that really sticks out. I mean, the whole chapter is great, but be sure to read items 3 and 4, and then jump on to items 7 and 8. And so they will tell us that Spiritism, when it's well understood, intellect, but especially when felt, heart, inevitably provides an unshakable and enlightened faith to those who doubt or waver, strengthening them to insist and persevere. But we need to understand it, and more than that, we need to feel it. And that's the unshakable faith, the rational faith, and not the blind one. She's going to finish to us in the message as we end our reflection today, saying, those who committed themselves to work in Jesus' vineyard should always be active and optimistic. Well, is it only Spiritist workers at the center? Well, if I don't work at the Spiritist center, am I lost? No. Committed themselves to work in Jesus' vineyard. How do we do that? By loving our neighbor, by loving our enemies, which is a hard one, but it's possible because in the gospel according to Spiritism, seriously, when Marcelo one time talked to me about this, I'm like, it's not possible. I mean, if Marcos is my enemy and Michelle is not, how can I harbor for him feelings that I have for her if he's my enemy? I mean, this guy, come on, right? But they say love for one's enemy is not wishing them any ill will. It's not wishing for their failure. It's not actually blocking any road towards conciliation or reconciliation. That's love for one enemy. So whenever we actually practice Jesus' teachings in the world proactively, we become committed to work in his vineyard. So she says, if you've committed yourself, always be active and optimistic, because Jesus, who came to the earth on a special mission, began his journey in the intimacy of his own family. Look at the message. Our mission starts in the intimacy of our own family. So there are things in the family that is going to require us to persevere and insist, such as in the education of a child who's complicated. I know a couple who is admirable in their persistence, in the insistence of the good in building the moral character of their daughters. I know it, I've seen it. It exists. And then she goes on to say, he began his intimacy, the work and the intimacy of his family. And then as a carpenter's helper. So she's talking about work. That in itself is also a vineyard of work towards the good. Well, if I'm just, an accountant, how can I be of good service? Well, there are ways, because there are people immediately near you. Maybe someone who's wishing for you to look at them, because that day they're really going to leave work and commit suicide. So all of a sudden you are attuned to the good spirits, spiritual antenna. And they say, hey, Mary, go ask the person how they're doing. She thinks it's her. She's never took an interest to the person before, but she walks over and she says, hey, Anna, how are you doing today? And Anna's going to look at her, surprised that somebody saw her, and hopefully say, not so good. She's going to say, well, can I help? And that's in itself a situation of assistance. We never know when we're going to be used towards the good. We never know when we are going to be called upon, which is why we should insist and persevere in maintaining our mental health, our mental field elevated, not allowing pessimism to take hold of it, not allowing distress, discouragement, disheartened feelings to take over our minds. He never turned down work of any kind, helping his mother around the house and also being humanity's guide. Can you remember? I mean, if you look at the text in the Gospels, the situations that Christ went through, and if it was us, we'd be like, man, forget these people. They're not getting anything. But Christ, spoke gently to more than 5,000 people on the mount where he delivered the Beatitudes. So he is the example. Joana de Angela is going to finish saying, everything was of the utmost importance to him, small or big. So she says, in order to persevere and insist on towards the good, reintroduce Jesus into your heart and mind. The most humane blessing in earthly existence is work. Work towards the good. And then she finalizes in saying, draw your strength from him to insist and persist until the end. When Joana de Cusa wanted to leave her husband because the situation at home wasn't what she expected, and she had found the good news, Christ's teachings, she was some of the women who was always found in the group of people following him. And her husband was of power and not really understanding of that new message that she was so fond of. And she told Christ that she wanted to follow him. He said, Joanna, go home and be faithful until the end. So she did. She went home. She looked at her husband as someone who was in need of her love and care because there was a spiritual commitment. She had 2 children. And although we already know the end as that Christian who was persecuted and burned at the stake, one of the lessons that we can get is the need to persevere on the things that most challenges us, because that's where opportunity lies. And also realizing when something is not worthy for us to continue persisting or insisting, which may only cause us. So being able to discern between one and the other is very important. On the message, on the note, I'm going to finalize. Susanna asked that we do collective passage today. And we are going to do just that. If anybody have any questions at the end. Hi, Ale. Resilience to heal our residents. Resistant fear is needed before it returns. Very good. Thank you for that message. Hello, Susanna. We are going to finalize with a prayer and collective passes, leading our friends online. Thank you so much for participating and watching. Have a wonderful week. See you next Sunday.